Andrew to come back.
What I what I might do is ask you to come up as well, Tamo, and ask you to a few questions, and then open it up to the floor. Tamo, firstly, am I having? Is this working or no? No problem. Firstly, I guess it's an very interesting fund because you have great core property across the Baltics, and you have Swedish tenants, you have Swedish banks, and the fund has been almost 95% Swedish investors. And of course, a lot of those investors have wanted to stay on, and so the idea of creating something that is a listed product here in Sweden is, of course, very interesting given that backstory. My question, I guess, to you guys is, we're facing headwinds now with not only Brexit, but we're going to see this US election and how that plays out as well. And of course, what my experience of being here in Sweden for 10 years has been that when we saw the last crisis, the global financial crisis in sort of 2008 play out, here in Sweden we didn't see huge issues. We didn't have the big Nordic banks firing large quantities of people like the big international banks did in the UK, for example. But here in Sweden we heard a lot about trouble in the Baltics, from things like crazy loans and Swedbank having a lot of difficulty, to things like hospitals needing to be closed down because there wasn't enough capital. And I guess what the room would like to hear from you is, you guys have been there, but how resilient is this fund, and what are the steps that you're taking to ensure that, given the headwinds that I've mentioned and going forwards, the fund will be able to withstand some of these issues?
Thanks for the question. I think my immediate response as a fund manager is that what we're doing right now is we're fixing the cost of debt at very low levels for the next 5 to 7 year period. Again, I think the difference between the first cycle and now the second cycle is immense. We have, this cycle is much more mature. In the last cycle, you had, I think the word cowboy capitalism could still be used, and what we have, I think, in general seen as well after the financial crisis, whereas before the debt levels went up in the private sector, but what has happened afterwards is that the private sector has been deleveraging year by year. At the same time, deposits have gone up. So again, this is something that the mindset is absolutely different. I think for me, this two key points, as I mentioned, 1998, the Russian crisis, where our exports stopped, and we had to learn from that lesson. Now about 15 or 12% of our exports are going to Russia, and as well 2008 and 2009, we figured out that too much loan is not good. But I think I would also say that our key energy right now is going into having these Nordic tenants feel comfortable in the buildings, and of course they also have had an influence on their expectations on the building qualities that we've seen in the Baltics now. So the buildings are top notch, absolutely of great quality. So I think we're as long as we see that trend of nearshoring from the international tenants, I think we can manage our risks quite well.
Good. Strong tenants, core real estate, low leverage.
And of course, you have to look at the square meter prices still. I think that's a very good element. When you can construct properties in the Baltics for around 1,000, 1,500 euros per square meter, we buy them at 2,000, maybe 200. So I think in the Nordics, the levels are 4,000, 5,000 euros per square meter. So we still have that healthy gap.
Yep. Sorry, Martin, did you want to?
Last week you announced that you're doing a follow-up
issue. And as Arvid sort of discussed a little bit, you're also coming to Stockholm. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, maybe?
Yes, as you all know, as we've said many times, our largest investors, or many of the investors, most of the investors today are from Sweden. So it's just a logical step for us to come here to Stockholm, to list it in Stockholm, because that's where our investor base is. At the same time, it's a Baltic product, Baltic fund investing into Baltic properties. And we do see an increasing appetite from the Baltic retail investors and pension funds, for that matter. So I think it's just a logical step for us to come here. As I mentioned, with hopefully with this next successful listing here in Stockholm, will be the biggest property fund in the Baltics already.
Elgus, a quick question for you. Catella has known Northern Horizon, and of course the chairman Lars, based in Denmark for many years. And in fact, we even at Catella looked at hoping and trying to acquire your platform, but were unsuccessful. But I, being an Australian as well as a Swedish citizen, it's of course been interesting to meet you and the team in the Baltics. And I think what the floor would be aware of is when investing into these types of products, you're really also buying into the management team. And it's all about people, and good people. And of course, we wonder what it is that, I mean, your background is you've been with PwC for many years in the Baltics and had a very strong accounting background. But can you talk to us a little bit about how you envision staying on and keeping the team together?
Sure. Just a bit of background about that. I mean, I do come from Australia, and I had worked in Australia for several years, I would say, in my earlier days. But I grew up as very much with a lot of Lithuanian heritage. So I was, the idea of actually coming back to my parents' place of birth and where they grew up was a wonderful thing. And when the opportunity arose to do that, I certainly grabbed it. I had spent 5 years in Hong Kong before coming to Lithuania, in fact, and working in the chartered accounting industry, like you mentioned. And what fascinated me most about countries or cities like Hong Kong were the incredible buildings that you see around the place. So I really became very interested in real estate at that time. And, you know, big real estate, things that you can look up to the sky. When I got the opportunity to come to Lithuania, of course, that was wonderful. I was working in the chartered accounting industry as a tax professional, actually. And but I really felt that the need was to come into the real estate market much more, in a much bigger way. And that's when I met with Lars Onimus, who was actually a client of mine in the past, from a different industry. But together we understood the same thing, that real estate, commercial real estate, anywhere in the world is a great thing to invest into. And we saw a real need that the Baltics did not have the sort of institutional idea of investing into real estate. So that's why we started out at that point. Fortunately for him, and me being Lithuanian, I was very happy to be actually living in Vilnius and not, say, in Copenhagen like he was. So in Vilnius, and with my financial background, I was able to start off that business and get the whole financial team in place for the whole group. And at that time, the group was mainly concentrating in the Baltics. But as I said before, we were expanding into Germany and then Russia, Poland, and some ideas in Scandinavia. So all of that sort of like near sourcing we were doing ourselves already by having a finance team, all of our top professionals being sourced from Lithuania or from Latvia, working in Vilnius for the group. And that was because the people are just very smart, well educated, all speak English, and that's really a big plus. And plus, they're a lot cheaper than anywhere else. I've got to be said. Going forward, though, my own position is that yes, I love being in the Baltics and having been behind all of the Baltic funds that we've had in the past. So I want to continue doing that. Then it's a question of making sure that we always have the right team in place, and of course we do. And then it comes to the question about sourcing of properties as well, as I think you mentioned earlier too. How do we do that? And being on the ground in the Baltics, and we have presence in all of the 3 capital cities, we're able to know exactly what's going on with every building that's of interest to us. So we've got very hands-on experience about who's building what and where and why, and having that sort of first information is much better than just relying on other advisors to give you these on-market deals. But of course, we look at those as well. But having the ability to source out properties by being there is, I think, a very big plus.